terms of like late bloomer, the thing is like you could do nothing or you could do something, whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
There's a time that you have left and there's what you make with that time, and how you want to spend it.
Hello, you are listening to the Late Bloomer Living podcast, where we are reimagining and redefining what it means to be in midlife, where we are gathering energy, momentum, and excitement for our next chapter via candid conversations with other midlifers about their own pivots, pitfalls, and triumphs. I'm Yvonne Marchese, your host, and I'm so happy you're here. Hello, and welcome to the last episode of season 2. Wow. First of all, I can't believe this is episode 109. I can't believe I've been doing this for over 2 years. I can't believe how much I still love it. Feels like the best decision I've made, besides getting married and having kids. I've learned so much doing this. And I just feel so lucky to be sharing these stories with you. I'm taking a little break because we have a lot going on around here. Our oldest child is heading off to college soon, so I'm giving myself some time and space to get everything ready and relish this last little bit of time before the big send-off. It's a bittersweet moment, I'm not going to lie. I'm excited, proud, sad, and anxious, all at the same time. We've decided to use this time for one last big trip as a family before everything changes. So, we're heading off to Ireland. I've never been, and I've always wanted to go, and I cannot think of a better way to celebrate where we are at this point in our lives. Change is inevitable. Change is scary. Change is exciting. I'm doing everything I can to embrace it with curiosity and a sense of adventure, as I like to encourage you to do. So I'm trying to walk that talk, baby. I'm also really excited to close out the season with today's guest because embracing change is at the heart of her story. Her name is Sue Mell. She just published her debut novel at the age of 65. The title of her book is Provenance. I love it. It's the story of a widower who is seeking to pull his life together after moving back to his sister's basement in his small hometown in upstate New York. And I got to thinking about her title. So I just looked up the definition of the word provenance, and here it is. Provenance is defined as the place where something originally came from or began, or a record tracing the ownership history of certain items that helps to confirm their authenticity and value, like if you think about artwork, right? And this all ties into her story so well. The place where something originally came from. Sue explores the meaning of that word in so many ways throughout the novel. And in my conversation with Sue, we explored her origins because besides writing, she's got a background that includes many different art forms. And there are so many parallels between her personal story and the story of her novel. So I'm not going to belabor this anymore. Okay, without further ado, here's Sue Mell. Let's go. Hey, Sue, thank you so much for being with me.
Oh my God, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. I love the podcast. I've really been enjoying it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so excited and a little nervous. I'm just going to say this right off the bat. We've got some construction happening, so we may have some noise interruptions, but I'm hoping that it stays to a minimum, and we'll just roll with it while we're together, right?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, awesome. So I just finished your book, and I told my husband he needs to read it.
Oh,
It's it is so it's so touching. It's so real. It just yeah, I immediately connected with DJ, the main character, and
thank
really
you.
everybody else.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's really great to hear.
Yeah. So this is your debut novel, yeah?
That's correct. Yes.
So have you written other novels that didn't get published, or is this the first one that's being published for you?
No, I was always a short story writer previously for fiction.
Yeah.
And this book started out as a short story when I was in graduate school. And I got to about like 30 pages, and I was working with my advisor, and I said, I think I could see the ending, and she's like, yeah, I don't think so. She said, I don't think this is the story. She's like, just keep going. And I mean, I was in denial for a long time, but when I hit like 60, 70, 80 pages, I was like, okay, I'm obviously writing a novel now, which I don't know how to do, but that's how you figure it out, is by doing it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So now you had a career as a stylist, right? Doing photography styling. And were you
Yes.
writing the whole time? Like, has it always been something that you've done, or is it something you picked up later in life?
No, it was something that I avoided for almost my entire
Oh my
life.
gosh, I love that answer.
I've always been a creative person. I've always done creative things. But writing was the one thing I was like, yeah, that is way too hard. It's too isolated. I didn't, a lot of my friends were English majors in college. I majored in art. I actually have a recording someplace from an astrology reading in my 30s, where the reader kept on saying, that all my stuff was in the house of writing. And he was saying, I see pages around you. And I was like, no, 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 that must be drawing. And I was like, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And he said, well, maybe you'll have an illustrated story, but it's the words that are important on the page. It's the words that are important to you. And I did actually become an illustrator. I had a pretty good business for about 7 years living out in San Francisco. And then the dot-com bust kind of I was like ahead of the curve and seeing my business dwindle. And then I went back to I was always doing the styling off and on to support myself. And then eventually my illustration business became a full-time. And then when I saw my business kind of slowly tanking, I went back to photography.
How did the .com bust affect your illustration career? Like, what was
Lots
the
of
tie-in?
magazines closed down. There was just less and less work. A lot of stock photography. People weren't spending money on hiring illustrators.
Gotcha. So a general, like, just the whole recession,
Shrinking.
just
Yeah.
shrinking and
Yeah.
pulling, and people pulling back on expenses and finding
Yeah.
other ways to do it, right?
Exactly. So yeah, and in my course, you talk a lot about pivots in the podcast, and basically I'm just like pivot, 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 pivot. So I actually started out in my 20s acting, or trying to.
Yeah. All right. We
And
have that in common. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
yeah. I know, it's acting, photography. It's a lot of similarities. And then I moved into illustration. And, in the background, to make the money, I was doing the styling or assisting other stylists or photographers. And then when I went back to doing styling, I was like, well, what am I going to do? I thought, oh, it'll be great. I can just pick and choose the illustration jobs I want. But actually, it was so much easier just to make money assisting or styling, and make more money than I was making doing illustration. But I was still looking for something to do. And I ended up being in a friend of a friend's, like a cabaret performance, which put me back on stage for a minute. And I was like, oh, I miss this. I still miss this.
Yeah.
Which then led down to like a very weird road. I briefly did some stand-up comedy, which
Wow.
yeah, and I made tens of dollars doing that.
But, well, how brave. That's the first word that I think of when I think of stand-up comedians, is
Yeah.
just sheer bravery.
Yeah, and I don't know who that person was. That was so brave to do that. So I was doing stand-up. That's where I got in the habit of writing, having to come up with new material, writing like every day.
Oh, yeah.
But then I kind of segued into doing personal pieces, independent pieces for radio. And then I was also writing narration there. And for like a minute, I did at the dawn of the age of podcasting, I did a tiny little podcast, 7 episodes, which were sort of thematic. And I would write a little short piece from my own life, and then I would interview people telling stories on the topic.
I want to go back and listen to that.
Yeah, it's still good. It's, it's a little long form, at the time, it's like you couldn't do it. Radio was like 5-minute, 10-minute pieces max. And I was doing these sort of half-hour episodes, which are now like everything, but it got sort of harder and harder to get getting people to interview. I would meet friends on a job and they would tell a great story at lunch, and I'd be like, oh, come do my podcast. And then they would like be totally like freaked out on the mic. And I was like, oh, I could just like do this myself, and that's when I started thinking about writing fiction and taking classes. So that was really when I was 50.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
I love the progression from the visual arts to the words, like, and that it was actually performance art that was your gateway,
Yes, my gateway drug.
Right? Your bridge
Yeah.
to having to write your material.
Yeah.
And then I imagine that started to give you confidence in your ability to write. And then all of a sudden that opens up possibilities, right?
Yeah. I had taken like a fiction writing class like in my 20s, like briefly. I took a class and I was like, oh yeah, this is like this is impossible. I can't do this. But then I had sort of gotten comfortable writing nonfiction, just these short little pieces, basically telling a story of something in my own life. And then I just thought, well, what else am I doing? And I'm already solitary. That was the thing that I had been so afraid. I was like, writing is so solitary. You go off by yourself in a room. And I was like, yeah, I'm already by myself in a room. I might as well do this.
I might as well populate the room with characters in my head, right?
Yeah. And the first, the early stories that I wrote were, very much based on events in my own life. They were fictionalized, but definitely I drew on my own life. And the novel was really, the premise, it took off from something that I knew, people that I knew, the premise of this guy whose wife had died and was kind of a bit of a hoarder. So it was someone that I knew, and we completely fell out. We're no longer in touch. And I just tried to imagine what his life might be like. And then the novel grew out of that.
Wow. Amazing, right? Where the ideas get sparked from. I mean, I know that you had, I guess it was a collection of short stories, right? Was that the Giving Care?
Oh, so
was it short stories, or was that more memoir?
No, Giving Care is little micro essays about caring for my mom. That's a more recent. So I wrote that after the novel.
Okay. Oh, that was written after the novel.
Yeah.
Oh,
so that's a recent. Yeah.
Gotcha. I thought it came before.
No.
So let's back up, because while you were working as a stylist, you were in San Francisco, right?
Correct.
And now you ended up moving back home to Queens, right? To be with your mom. So let's kind of go back and see where that fits into your puzzle and how this all developed. Were you already writing when you were in San Francisco?
Yeah. So I started writing in San Francisco about 2009. So actually started probably 2007. I started like taking classes, and I had trouble finding a class that I really liked or a workshop. And I ended up working with one-on-one with an editor, which was more helpful to me at that time anyway, than a group situation. And then I published my first short stories. I had kind of some early success publishing short stories. So I was writing and freelancing as a stylist. And then around 2012, I got a little stuck. Basically, I had used up kind of the stories that had been in my head sort of my whole life, that all sort of poured out into those first short stories. And I didn't really know how to move forward from there. Like the editor I was working with, he said, well, so this is great. What else can you write about? And I was like, I don't know. So I kind of floundered for a while. And then I was like, well, I'll go to graduate school. And then because I didn't have any kind of formal education in writing.
Gotcha. So you went back to school.
I did a low residency program. Yeah, Warren Wilson, which is in North Carolina. They have a great program for writers, an MFA program.
That's fantastic. And how old were you when you went and did that?
So I was 53.
Oh my gosh, I'm getting so excited. I love hearing that you were willing to invest in yourself. Yeah. You took a chance, because I think so many people stop themselves from going back to school or stop themselves from doing something because they feel like it's too late. And did you run into any of that in your own, like that kind of Definitely. Not helpful self-talk before you decided to do it?
You're spending all this money on yourself for this very personal thing that may not go anywhere.
Yeah.
So you go to school for two, you can do it in 2 years, or you can do it in longer. I actually did some extra time because in the middle of my graduate program, I also ran into like a stuck place. And I had one semester that kind of like almost crashed and burned, but ended up being one of the semesters that I learned the most once I got past my writer's block, or whatever you want to call it.
That. I love that, because I do think that there's so much juice in that, Sue. When we run into those places that seem like we've run into a wall and there's nowhere else to go, and then you hit that, there's like this, I imagine that must have felt like a little bit of a feeling of despair.
Oh yeah, I was thinking of dropping out. It was a tough, I mean, some of it too was a misunderstanding with the mentor that I was working with at the time, who was, a very well-known teacher. And I was like very nervous, and somehow we just got off on kind of like poor footing somehow. And I mean, he was critical, like in a good way, in the way that you should be, but I took it like he would ask questions, and instead of my thinking, he would say, why did she do this? Why did the character do this? I would hear like, why did she do this? Like, what is wrong with you? And it was like, and it was a funny thing. He was moving. So we kind of, everything was done through email exchanges of packets, but we ended up having a phone conversation. And that totally cleared everything wide open. And then the rest of the semester was great. And was like, I feel like everything I know about dialogue, I learned from him, actually, Pete Turchi.
Yeah.
He was a great teacher.
Amazing. Like those little misunderstandings, those little things that are actually coming in your own brain, like the way we interpret things that are said by other people, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's rich. That's rich. But you kept going.
I kept going. And then, as I say, the novel started as a story, and the first 100 pages of it became my graduate thesis. But it was a completely different draft. Then it took me about another year to actually finish it once I was out of school. And
was this happening while you were still in San Francisco, or had you moved to Queens yet? Yeah, okay.
No, so this was like, I finished it in like 2016, 2017.
Oh, wow.
And I worked with a coach who was not, wasn't writing, was just a coach, a person who helps you like work on whatever stops you from writing.
Right.
But she's also a writer. So, I mean, she had opinions too. She was helpful. But, and then I was sending that draft of the novel around, querying agents and getting like crickets. I got like one rejection and then like silence everywhere else. And then January 2018, that's when my mom fell. So then I came back to New York, and the first year was just basically crisis management and figuring everything out and figuring out how to care for her and hiring aides.
And she has dementia, right? So you were already concerned and saw that she was going to be needing care, and then she fell. Is that how that happened?
No, so she had a small fall like in 2017, I think, where she blacked out, which ended up being she was out like shopping at a little corner grocery in the neighborhood, and she passed out, which was a blood pressure issue. And she ended up being fine. She got a couple of stitches in her head. But that's sort of when I got involved with her. We hadn't been particularly close. I had kind of some estrangement with my family over the years. But I got involved and I started being in touch with her from San Francisco weekly, and then eventually kind of on a daily basis, talking to her on the phone.
Yeah.
And that's when I was sort of thinking, like, I should really live in both places. I should make New York my home base and keep my apartment in San Francisco. And so in 2018, I had thought I was going to go work this month-long gig that I work. It's in a bedding manufacturer showroom, West Point Home. I was going to work that gig. And then while I was in New York, I was going to kind of figure out my transition, some kind of transition of being in both places. Except then she fell, and then I just was there, just in New York. So I just left all my stuff in my apartment in San Francisco. And I had a friend that I had a friend who's also a stylist, who she'd been an assistant to me and then was a stylist in her own right. And she would fly out. I kind of like passed my clients on to her when they asked me for a referral. And she would like fly out and stay in my apartment and use my car and use my gear, basically like live my life.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was funny.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's
So
a
then
huge change.
Yeah. It was a big, and the whole time, people would ask me like, what are you going to do? And I'd be like, I don't know. It was just like a big question mark. And there was no way to know. There was just no way to know. I mean, at first it was hard to know whether my mom would survive the fall even. And then
it was a big fall, right? Like, I think you told me it was 12 steps.
Yeah. She broke like all her ribs on one side. She broke a clavicle, and she fractured her knee on the opposite leg. So she was really immobilized, broke her nose, a couple of fingers.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah.
But so at the end of like a year, things had kind of settled down, and I was like, well, I'll keep my apartment. So still keeping my apartment, even though I couldn't sublet it. But I sort of thought, well, like paying the rent on that as like my being paid to take care of her, sort of that kind of a trade-off. Like I'm taking care of her and she pays the rent on my apartment. So I still have my life out there.
Okay. Yeah.
And then as long as I was here in New York, I applied for a fellowship with Bookends, which is at SUNY Stony Brook, Southampton. And that's a 1-year mentorship program to revise a completed draft of a novel.
Wow. Okay.
So I applied to that, and I got accepted. And you go out there. This was before COVID, for 10 days there's a Southampton Writers Conference. That's where you start, and you meet the other people in your cohort, and then you work in a small pod with 2 other writers. And then your books have been matched up so that you will be able to help each other's weaknesses and strengths. So the first half of that year, you work with your pod revising, and we met, I think, every 3 weeks. It was another person's turn, and you had a 3-hour meeting that was just about your book. and they had read your draft and gave you feedback. And then the second half of the year, you still have your PA, but you work one-on-one with a mentor who is a well-published writer. I worked with Amy Hempel, actually, was amazing.
I don't know her. I'll have to look her up. Amy Hempel?
Hempel, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Who was somebody that I had, whose work I had been a fan of since the 80s.
Wow. So you're
really,
like, oh my gosh, I'm working with Amy Hempel.
It was really good. She was amazing. It was good.
Yeah.
But so the second half of that year, that was also when COVID hit.
Yeah. Wow.
So kind of luckily, I was sort of very ahead. I kind of had to finish my revision pretty early on, because once it got in the thick of it, then I had no aides. It was just me taking care of my mom full time.
Wow. Which is no joke. And yeah. At what point did you realize that your mom had dementia? When did that all start to become evident to you?
Well, when I was first here, I knew that she was having memory loss, and I had gotten involved, when I was still in San Francisco. Like, I would come to visit several times a year. We made her bank account. We made her account joint so I could see what she was doing or what she wasn't doing and make sure everything got paid. And just more and more, I was aware of what she would forget. And, from your dad, you see the signs, there's a lot of Post-its around the house of where reminders, things are. And, but I didn't know anything about dementia. And, but then also, when I came to visit, she would hide things, she managed. She was in her house. She was still taking care of a house and a yard and a cat. And, but she had the help of a driver, who she met, who was a car service driver, who then became, a friend. And he sometimes helped her with the grocery shopping and took her wherever she needed to go and did some help with the yard, that kind of stuff.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, so there was a fall, which also, obviously she hit her head, which does not help.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, the rehab, I could just really see kind of rehab where you take an elderly person and you put them just in a room and they're surrounded by strangers all day long. Every day that she was in rehab, either I or my brother or my sister-in-law were there, like between 9 and 5. So she still had contact with the world, but you take a person out of their environment.
She got confused. My dad had a couple of health issues come up. So my dad, I think we talked about it before I hit the record button, but my dad also has dementia. And several years ago, he had a couple of different incidents where he landed in the hospital, and he was so much more confused in that situation than he was at home. And so it's interesting. And it was really worrisome in the hospital before I realized how important that daily routine is. For somebody with dementia. There's a grounding that happens, and being in their own space and their own routine. And when you take them out of that, it's very disorienting and confusing.
So I ended up going to, I did a workshop, and that's where I really understood. And that's sort of when I began to see, I was like, oh, yeah, that's what she has. But I also connected with NYU Langone has a family support program. And I just called them, and they connected me with a social worker who was amazing. And she was a person who helped me figure everything out, really. And initially the aides I had were terrible. And I sort of was complaining about something, and she was like, whoa. She's like, you need to go through another agency. I was kind of walking on eggshells in my own house. She's like, that's not okay. That is not okay.
Yeah,
Um,
it is a challenge. My mom is the full-time caregiver for my dad, and
yeah.
there's an agency that she works with there, and it's challenging because people say they'll be there at a certain time and they don't show up, and she's still working,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
she has a schedule that she's trying to keep, and when people don't show up at the time they say they're going to come,
Right.
it's so tricky. Like, how so you've got this fascinating story of like, here
Right. I
you
feel
are,
like
you're
we've gone really far,
yeah, well,
far
no, but
afield.
you're a debut novelist and you're also a caregiver,
Yeah.
a, and in the thick of it. And that's the reality. We get older and these challenges come up where, that you didn't have in your 20s,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely.
But this is what happens as we get older, and our parents age, or our kids get older and things happen, and things just get complicated. And funny, I'm thinking about your writing career is kind of blossoming right now in the midst of you being a caregiver. How does that feel to you?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, especially, before COVID, I kind of had like this really lucky situation, which I didn't have to work another job, and I had dedicated time. I had like 3 or 4 hours a day that I could just spend writing. And then I had this support of this fellowship, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and then even after COVID, when it was just me and my mom, there still was, early in the morning. And then she takes quite a few naps in the day. So I had time to myself.
I think it
So
can
I
be
lost.
hard for caregivers to carve out that time. I congratulate you on taking advantage of what time you've had.
Because I
And
have
yeah,
have always done something creative, and that's always sort of been my way through everything, like any kind of hardship or emotional stress or breakup. That's always been my way through. So if I didn't do that, then all I would be doing is caring for my mom. And that would be too hard for me psychologically. I couldn't, I have to have something that's me, that's mine, that I'm doing. So it's really kind of it's a bit of a survival mechanism for me, really, to have some kind of outlet. And in that way, writing is easy, never easy, but easy in the sense that you can do it. I used to write a lot I still do. I'll write on my phone if I'm downstairs or something, or I have a thought, or scribble on a piece of paper. My handwriting is pretty legible, so I try to use my phone.
I love
Um,
the notes app on my phone. For me, sometimes I go out, go for a walk, and it's a working walk in a way. I'm thinking about stuff or thinking about a new episode or some sort of content around what I'm doing, and the notes app is amazing,
right, right, right.
voice, and especially like just doing a voice recording into the notes app, which just helps me kind of vomit the stuff out of my head and get it in.
I know a lot of people do that. I never really got fluent with that, but I know a lot of people. I used to have a friend who would do that at lunch all the time. She'd just be suddenly talking and be like, "What? Who are you talking to?" She's like talking to her phone. But to loop it back a little bit, just there was this funny thing that while I was revising the novel and living at my mom's with all my stuff in this apartment 3,000 miles away, I was writing about this guy who had all his stuff in a storage unit that he had to deal with. And actually, long after the novel was written and finished and due to be published, was when I had my stuff shipped to New York. And that actually was a travesty. The movers, the packing, the person that did it, there were all kinds of issues. Every box was like damaged or dented.
Oh,
Things didn't show up. And the four guys packed it up But on this end, only one person, the guy driving the truck, and the truck didn't fit in the parking lot of the storage facility. So he had to park it someplace else, rent a U-Haul,
Oh my
unload
gosh.
everything off the truck, come to the storage unit, and then it was just him and me, so I just stood by the empty like storage unit while he like ferried things up. And it was like very reflective of like the novel, it was like life.
And how
imitating.
funny. So that didn't come before the novel, because there's a lot of this stuff.
I wrote it and then it happened. I made it happen. I made a moving catastrophe.
That's crazy, because that's almost exactly what happens in the novel with his stuff in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the details are slightly different, but
it was very similar. I was like, oh my God, how can this be happening? How can this be happening?
Crazy. Yeah, I bet you were blown away by that. And I'm thinking about your whole journey with this story. It's been a long time. It's been a minute, right?
Yeah.
So you started it as a short story way back, what year?
I mean, 2009 was when I was really writing short stories.
I mean,
and that's when I was
so
first.
Yeah. So I just want, for anybody listening who is a first-time novelist, I want you to hear this story. Seriously, because this progression of, okay, it's a short story. Oh, and it's more than a short story. This is clearly a novel. I'm
you mean,
but
the book? So the book itself, I mean, was not. I mean, I was writing other stories. Although I did write about that character. I did write a short story about him in like 2011 or 12.
Okay. And when was it that you finished the first draft of the novel and started shopping it around to agents? Remind me of that.
2017.
2017. And now here we are. It's 2022.
Yeah. So it took me like 2 years. It was over two. It didn't like take 2 years, but over the course of 2 years that I wrote the original draft. And then basically, 8 or 9 months that I wrote the revision, and that ended up being the finished book.
Yeah. Once you had, so here we go. Let's get into the publishing question. Once you had your revised draft and then you start sending out again, what was that process like?
That was a nightmare.
Oh
no. No. I queried over 100 agents, and I submitted to contests and independent presses.
How did you keep going, Sue?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a funny thing, but I had Sue Mell, who's one of the co-directors of the Bookends program. At the end of your fellowship, you have like a little chat with her about like what's next. And she had suggested to me, she said, you should play all sides of the street. She says, submit to agents, submit to contests, submit. And essentially I promised her that I would do that. And because I had said that I would, that was really the thing that made me keep doing it, because I was like, oh, I can't not. I promised her that I would give it my all. And then, I did like query writing workshops, and, same thing. I looked for online support for people that were submitting novels and Facebook binders. And I had like agents who liked the book, but not enough to take it on. And then I basically was just about out of my list of agents. And I had been thinking of possibly submitting to like to She Writes Press, which is a hybrid press, which is the only hybrid press I would have done, because they are very reputable and they do a lot of literary.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Fiction.
Yeah.
And then I won one of the contests, which included a prize of $1,000 and publication, and that's Madville Publishing. So that was my.
So that was it. That was
it.
Wow. Did you ever consider just self-publishing?
No. Because I stubborn that way. I mean, I think that it's a great thing for many people, and I have only admiration for people that do it. And I know people have found great success. People have self-published and then been picked up or had other novels picked up by, Big Five. But I always wanted that, a feather in my cap in a way. I
Yeah.
always wanted that recognition of being of somebody else publishing my
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. I love that there's so many ways to do it now that are available to authors. And so anybody else who's a new time author, I mean, there's so many ways to skin a cat now, If you really want to go the route of being published, just know that you're going to have to put out all those inquiries and take all that rejection for that time, most likely, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, I think one of the reasons many people do self-publish is because they're older and because they don't have time.
The clock is ticking. Yeah.
The clock is ticking, and that whole process, even in the best case scenario. So let's say you're super fast and it takes you a year to write a book, and then let's say you get an agent right away. Still going to take them, at least, half a year. You're going to end up doing some revision with that agent, and then they have to sell your book. And then let's say you get a Big Five publisher, it's still going to be another year before that book comes out. That's a lot of time. Publishing my first novel at 65.
Yes, I'm so to me that's just like the most exciting thing. You must have a sense of accomplishment.
I do. It's funny, I recently, in advance of our speaking, I better reread the book, which is, actually now, so it's finished in 2020, but 2 years, that's a long time in life to, as a writer, you keep writing. So then you sort of become a different person all the time on the page as your work grows.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see. I still love the book, so that was good.
Well, and rightly so. It's lovely.
And I don't know if you saw, but I did the cover art.
Did you? Oh, of course you did.
Which was an amazing thing. That's like the wonder.
No, I did not notice that detail. And looking at
my publisher, Kim Davis, I had some photos we were going to maybe use, but they didn't really work out. And we were kind of looking at some stock photography and artwork. And I said, can I just take a shot at this? And she's like, go ahead, and I hadn't painted in years.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of a guitar silhouette there, which ties into the story. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Wow.
So that was a really nice full circle. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And somehow ties into the story itself, like the story of you doing the artwork. I love that he's got this song in the back of his head the whole time, so there you are doing your own creative work, and there it is on the cover.
And that was definitely something, as I was writing the book and writing that character, I mean, you're writing somebody else, but it's like in a dream where you are really all the characters in the dream are all made out of the fabric that is you. So that was kind of the expression of that ambition, was giving him that song that he was somehow trying to write. That was
and his deceased wife was an artist, right? So
correct.
There's that.
I put a lot of myself.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But I wanted to say too that you were talking about, interruption is not really the right word, but having kids and the way that can impact, a creative path. But because I didn't have kids, that was sort of how I ended up doing all these different things. I never was content. Somehow I've always been doing two things at once. I really admire people that have just like one. I'm like, oh, if only, that would be so nice to have only one. But so I was always looking for some something to put my energy and spirit into. And now basically I have my mom. That's kind of me. That's my that's the family thing that I didn't do. It's strangely now it's what I'm doing, is taking care of somebody.
Which is amazing. And to go from having a little bit of estrangement, I hear that in your story as well, and then finding your way back to relationship in the most intimate of ways. All of a sudden you're back and you're the caregiver. That's life, man.
Yeah. Full
Right?
circle.
You just never know where it's going to take you, and the gifts that are actually hidden in the challenges of that are
Agreed. Yeah. And that's definitely for me too, is always like, what can I make out of this? And my whole progression was always trying to find the creative medium that would express the most of who I am and sort of the best of my abilities. And the great thing about writing is that I write a lot of stories that have to do with art or artists. You can put everything in there. You don't have to you can have the character that's an actress. You can have the character that's the painter or a sculptor, or whatever it is. So you get to sort of have that life in a way, even if that's not what you're currently doing.
Yeah. It's been just lovely to talk to you.
It's been lovely to talk to you too. I feel like we went like, woo.
We
like,
did.
I don't know where we went.
That's the way I roll, girl. It's just that our stories are complex. It's not like, it's not like point A to point B. It is, I think the more that we can embrace the idea that it's not a steady meteoric rise upwards, that the down moments could actually be our most fruitful times for launching us into the next thing. That's what I see in your story, and we have been all over the place, but that's kind of what I'm getting from what's happened for you.
Yeah. I mean, and in terms of like late bloomer, the thing is like you could do nothing, or you could do something, whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
You could, there's time, and, there's a time that you have left, and there's what you make with that time, and how you want to spend it. The options are out there, which is what I love about what you talk about so often is just people just like chasing down dreams or ideas that they had, either 5 minutes ago or 50 years ago. Doesn't really matter, but it's like, where are you now, and what do you want to do today? What do you want to do today?
That's the real question. I mean, and sometimes it is the thing that you wanted when you were a kid that you never got to do. Sometimes it's still in you, and sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's something completely surprising. Like for me, photography was that. I didn't know I wanted to be a photographer. That came out of nowhere. I mean, I knew I liked taking pictures, and I wanted to take good pictures, and I wasn't taking good pictures, and I was frustrated because I couldn't get the kind of pictures I thought I wanted. You know what I mean? And a layoff from a job is what launched me down that path.
Right.
You just don't know. You're not the same person you were yesterday.
Right.
So it's a constant checking in, I think, of taking a temperature of yourself and what you want today.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I could talk to you for forever.
I know.
Where can people get your book?
You can get the book. It launches on July 19th. And then it will be available from bookshop.org or from Madville Publishing or Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the usual places.
Fantastic. And I'm taking a quick look to see, because we're here talking on July 6th, and I'm going to have this out in the world for you by August 3rd. So by the time people hear that,
Everything will
the
be
book
out.
will be out and ready to go. So go get it, folks. And are you working on anything new now, or where can people keep in touch with you and find out what's next for you?
SueMellWrites.com is my website, and you can get a hold of me through there, and it's got whatever is newly published or events coming up, that's all up there. Instagram also is also Sue Mell Writes.
Well, fantastic. I can't wait for people to hear your story. Thank you very much for sitting down with me and
Thank
getting
you.
into all the stuff.
Such a pleasure. Yeah, I do feel like we got into all the stuff. I was like, whoa. I was like, what did I say?
Well, thanks again, and good luck with the launch.
Thank you so much.
I wish great things for you.
All right, Yvonne, it's been great. Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. A novel that was years in the making, a woman who started in the visual arts and the performing arts and ended up becoming a writer after years of thinking that that was the last thing she would want to do. A woman who had stops and starts along the way, but kept going when things got tough. I love it when I hear stories of people surprising themselves. One of the things I love the most about my conversation with Sue was seeing an example of how someone could take on the work of a caregiver without completely losing themselves in the process. I mean, man, she published a novel. Incredible. You know, I think it's very likely that many of us will find ourselves, if we haven't already, we will find ourselves in the role of being a caretaker at some point in our lives. If you're a parent, you've been a caretaker to your children. If you're married, it's likely that you may end up being a caregiver to your spouse. If you're lucky enough to still have your parents around, they may need your help. And, you know, like I said, maybe you've already been there. And, you know, by the way, I want to put this out there. If you have been a caregiver and you have some insights to share about how you managed and what you learned along the way, I'd really love to hear from you. It might make a really good podcast episode for season 3. So get in touch. latebloomerliving@gmail.com is my email. And speaking of season 3, I will be back in September. That'll be September 21st with a brandy new episode. I've already recorded several of the interviews for season 3 for when we come back. And oh man, I'm overflowing with excitement about who's coming up. So be sure to come back and join me then. Wow. Okay, I'm off to Ireland. I was going to try to do an Irish accent, but that just went really wrong. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope you take inspiration and hope from these stories. And by the way, if you are interested in learning more about Sue Mell, you can go to latebloomerliving.com and click on the show notes for episode 109. Thank you again so much for listening. This is the longest goodbye ever. I feel like I'm going to miss you. I hope you have a fantastic week. Stay safe and well. Talk soon.